Before I started secondary school, I had recently paid a visit to the doctor, recommended by my teacher, after noting some odd behaviours. My doctor diagnosed me with autism. He explained to me that it meant that my brain worked a little bit more differently, unlike everyone else, and that I would interpret stuff much more different as well. He told me not to worry and that life would go as normal, and at first it seemed like that, but that was until the social workers came over. They paid a visit quite often at my house. They seemed nice, but they kept on talking about stuff about the future and how I was going to cope, and making it all sound as was going to be a bad thing of me going to school. And I always found it so disruptive whenever they came over. It was like everything had to halt for them being there. But they did give me one nice little thing, a little notebook. They wanted to record my progress and see how I was doing at school. So they asked me to write in there about my thoughts and feelings, like a little diary. I was never really good at writing though, so I instead drew pictures. Here's a picture of me. I was often quite large, hefty and chubby back at school, but my dad and uncle used to say that I was just cuddly. And my vocabulary was, well, quite limited. Well, I still struggle to this day with some certain words here and there. So I began sketching when I started secondary school. There were many words that I used to take quite literally and seriously, such as climb a wall, be a deer, and there was a lady that acted quite silly. She used to say that she had a child inside of her, so I used to thought that she was pregnant. Sausage dogs I thought were turned into hot dogs. That's the reason why I never ate one for years. I thought it was too cruel. And one time, a PE teacher said that we had to take off our shoes and run round barefoot. I started to cry. When the teachers asked me why, I said that I couldn't join in, because I didn't have any bare's feet. Back in school, I was very sensitive. I used to cry quite often back at school. It was mainly over little things, such as a pen. I'd never liked using a pen. You could never rub it out like a pencil. But a lot of students and teachers used to thought that I did it just to seek attention. I never mixed very well with the kids back at school. I was tricked, teased and made fun of. I used to walk down this corridor where all the students would hang out to, and the boys would start following me and walking so weird. I just found it so uncomfortable, and one day I just finally had enough, and I just turned around and asked as to why exactly were they walking so weird. And they told me that they were just copying me. They saying that I walked weird, like a penguin, and that I should have gone back to Antarctica. But, to be fair though, I think I would have preferred it over there. After all, it didn't really look too bad in Happy Feet, I guess. My mum suggested best that I stop going down that corridor and talked about anything that made me feel a bit upset with my year head. Our year head was a science teacher. When we went in to get registered early in the morning, we would often do it in the science room, and on display he would have all sorts of stuff. A bee's hive, various creatures living in his tanks, and one time a pig in a jar. Despite my one-to-ones with my tutor, there was still a lot of things at school that didn't make any sense. One time, we had to go into the hall. It was for the sex education, because we were watching a little play about a bloke who wanted to have it away with his girlfriend, although his girlfriend was very reluctant with said actions. But however, for me, I didn't quite understood as to why we were watching an EastEnders-like play. So when it came to the Q&As, I asked as to what was the point of all this? Why were we watching it? The bloke looked very puzzled indeed. The children started to laugh and very much informed me that my teachers would explain for me. They never did. They probably thought I was being silly. When it came to break, being on the playground, there wasn't really a whole lot to do, since everyone seemed to be in their own little group. So I snuck off onto the field, and there I would carry my little carrying stick, what Mum made me, and I would collect anything I could find on that field. I once found this little magazine page that had been ripped out. It had a bunch of pictures of girls on it and their numbers. All the boys in the classroom say they wanted some... to keep this explanation a bit more clean, some dirty talking these so-called ladies were looking for. But the most fascinating thing of all my wildest searches on that field, was a £1 coin, but it was bent at the side. I showed my teacher, he said it was a bunch of rubbish, but I thought it was a work of art. But I didn't have it for too long though. Now that was because it was Cupcake Wednesday. And the lady was nice enough, she accepted wonky coins. I had a very terrible memory. I found it very hard to remember that I had homework to bring in the following day, even if I brought it in, or even had it. But another thing I struggled with was to remember as to which classroom I had to go to. I'd spent hours down the corridor looking for the right door, only to come in with a rather unhappy teacher. I was unsure as to what to do. But however, by that age, I was very much fascinated with the cuckoo clock. It just seemed so friendly, popping out every hour, letting the household knowing what time it was. So I thought it would be a wise move to do the same thing with the teacher, even just smile and wave, in order to show him that I meaned him no harm. But he didn't look too happy when I did it though. And angry faces really stressed me out. I tried to cope the best way I could. I hid under a table if things were getting too much. The teachers and the head of staff came to the conclusion that these behaviours were just getting too distracting for a learning environment. It was eventually decided by them that it would perhaps be for the better that I would leave the classroom and I would learn separately away from the other kids. And this is where I first met Mrs. Sugar, who was a part of the learning support group. She wasn't a patient lady, and she had a really terrible temper. She could snap really easily, and she couldn't at all put up with my antics. And well, with a rough exterior and me being quite tearful, it didn't take too long before I started to tear up. Oftentimes she would warn me that if I didn't stop crying, I'd go straight down to referral, which would only escalate the situation even further. One time, I was put outside and I was told by her that I would have to stay in all break. I was so distraught by this news that I decided to run off. But just as I was leaving the door, I looked back and I saw her, but I just kept on going. I was just dreading and feared that I was going to get into trouble. But I never faced any consequences for those actions, although I never saw her too many times after that. For the social workers in the school, it just became more and more confusing as to what to do with me, so it wasn't too much longer before they had to move me somewhere else. Eventually, I went to the learning support shed. It was where all the naughty children went to during some points of the week in lesson time, and that was where I met all sorts of kids with different backgrounds. Some had parents, some didn't, and some of them even had parents that were divorced. But one particular person I remembered there was a girl, but preferred being called a he, and even liked wearing boys' clothes, but the school forbade it. I got along well with him, but we didn't really talk too much outside of the shed and school. And if there wasn't a teacher around, we would sit together and start talking about things. He told me that he had a lot of problems at home with his parents. It wasn't too long before they moved away. Right behind my old school, there was a little nature reserve that the school had access to, and there was a lovely little duck pond that occasionally the ducks used to fly on over to the school and end up getting lost. And, well, the ducks would get a good old startle during break and lunch. That's when the students were out playing and, well, chasing the poor things. Whenever I got sad or depressed at school, this is where I would sneak off away from the classrooms. And there I would climb on over to the nature reserve, and there I would watch the ducks and the many other animals that used to come in. I especially really enjoyed it when it came to spring, because that was when all the animals were starting to have their babies, and it was so nice watching them without anything being spoilt. There were no nagging teachers, no troublemaking students, no competition, nothing. It was just peaceful, quiet and relaxing. It was my quiet little zone as to where I could calm down to and relax. A place where even the animals could take